Hello and welcome to the first in a series of videos focused on each of the 100 and something diorama shelves my wife and I have built to display our toy collections. I primarily collect 3 3/4 to 4-inch modern action figure lines like G.I. Joe and Star Wars, along with anything I deem compatible with the scale. My wife collects Sylvanian families, little woodsies, and some Playmobil or whatever fits in with her critters. In this video we'll start with one of the first areas of my display we worked on, a massive military base. So zooming in a little bit, you can see the general layout of the base. I have no issue mixing toy lines, and a lot of the dials are set up in accordance with my own little alternate universe. The base is primarily for G.I. Joe, but I try not to put any details specific to one toy line as I like to move things around and change things up a bit. As a kid, once G.I. Joe came out, it was the only line I was really interested in until my toy days were over the first time around. I'd had Star Wars and He-Man and a pretty decent collection of the Dungeons and Dragons line before that. But the Joe's articulation blew my mind. And articulation remains one of the more important factors for me in action figures to this day. Starting way up top, we have the airfield. It's a nice space to store the aircraft that isn't hanging from the rafters, but it's 6 feet in the air, so it's hard for most people to see. Here we have the modern era Sky Striker. The plane has no decals because I'd planned to paint it up as one of the Seekers eventually, probably Skywarp, as the black and purple is just classic 80s cool. Here on the helipad are a couple of dusty Avengers jets that will probably get donated to a kid in the future. The Quinjet is okay, but its hidden missile reveal's default position on mine is open, which turns it all hunchbacked, so I really can't hang it. The size kinda sucks too, but if it displayed well, I could get past that. Here we have a shot with the overhead colored lights on, which gives everything a little bit of a different look. Here's the Toys R Us X-Wing that came out however many years back. I remember paying like $65 for it and feeling like I was a bit much for the size of the ship, but the recent re-release of this mold is over $100, so I guess I feel better in retrospect. Here's the airfield all emptied out from the front. Like I said, it's a decent space. It's all made of foam over cheapo box store shelves, and while fairly durable, it does scuff up and dent from heavier toys. And here's a quick shot of the empty helipad. The window facades on the building were made out of a too thin plastic that have warped a bit over time, but it's really not that noticeable in person. Here's a shot of Django's Slave One with my small collection of Mandalorians. I had a lot of the early G.I. Joe stuff as a kid, but I never owned a Tomahawk, so getting one as an adult was a nice bonus, being as the modern line wasn't really all that vehicle heavy. The Eaglehawk here is a nice little helicopter, although I can see the vintage figures fitting in it better than the modern ones do. It's not really all the chopper's fault, as a lot of modern Joes, especially the early 25th anniversary figures, have an issue with sitting down. I still prefer the modern Joe construction, but when it comes to sitting in vehicles, the vintage Joes really have an advantage. This is just a zoomed out pic. Operating the Cobra-colored mobile missile station is the direct-to-consumer salvo, and he's one of the first figures I picked up when I began collecting as an adult again. And just because it's in the area, here's a very spiderwebby Soldier Force C-130, or whatever they called it. I used shoe polish to try to dirty it up a little bit and take down the shine, but I'd still like to repaint it someday. Below the airfield on the top shelf is the general's office. The desks were thrown together with some basswood scraps, and the chairs are antique dollhouse stuff. I need to add some pictures to the wall and degrees and such to give it a little more depth, and being an early dio, there's some glue slop to clean up. Here we have my G.I. Joe command staff waiting for a late arrival. On that same shelf is a waiting area and a reception desk. It still needs a lot of detail, which is a running theme in my older dios. I focused on getting the main structures of all the dials done so I could come back later and do detail work. Honestly, I don't know if I'll ever consider any of these done, as I'll keep revisiting them and adding and redoing things. Moving down a shelf, we have the base's control center, made entirely out of Legos. My wife and I kind of went through a Lego phase that eventually died out. I just wanted to use the pieces. I'm actually kind of proud of this, as I just started building without a plan and it turned out alright. And here's a top-down view of it pulled from its shelf. In the center is a covered command chair with adjustable screens flanked on both sides by different stations. This is a different angle on the right-hand stations. You can kind of see my mainframe figure, which is rarely or never seen sunlight, has yellowed upper thighs for some reason. It's the only G.I. Joe I have with this issue. Here's a front view of the command chair manned by Rise of Cobra Scarlet. I'd like to find some cool heads-up display stickers for the view screens eventually. And a quick look from the back. The tiling drives my OCD a little nuts because while it's all the correct color, the tiles aren't uniform. Like I said, I worked with the pieces I had available. And to finish the command center, these are little machinery greeble things that I built to fill in the rest of the shelf. Moving down another shelf, we have the base's medical center. This one's going to get a total rework soon, as the Brooder medical stuff didn't come out until long after I'd built this, and I'd like to match the background with that. It works for now, and I need at least one more of those B-World sets. Here's an unfortunate green shirt. This is the only wheelchair I've ever found to work in this scale, and I keep meaning to get another for my Professor X. Behind the desk we have Dr. Elsa from the Indiana Jones line. The only other figures from that line I have are Henry Jones Sr. and one of the Indies. The Henry figure is okay, but every Indie I've ever seen from that line is a mess. Below the medical center is the Barracks. It's all furniture for Marauder gun runners. I'd like to find some proper footlockers for the end of the bunks, as well as finishing thin mattresses for the bunks themselves. My wife made one for the top left bunk, and it turned out decent considering how soft goods generally don't work great at this scale. Going down another floor, this is my detention center's hub. There are cells on both sides through reinforced doors. I'm still looking for a guard station for the middle of the room. Also, I tried real hard to incorporate a trapdoor from above just to conform to 80s playset standards, but a trapdoor in the barracks was hard to justify. Here's one of the cells, currently occupied by whatever this Fortnite Nutcracker dude name is. Nutcrackers creep me out in that clowny sort of way, and my wife knows this, so a figure I would have gladly passed on now haunts my collection, and he can just sit and rot in this cell. And on the very bottom of the base's left-hand side is 2 rooms separated by this hallway, currently patrolled by Law and Order, a great modern update to a classic figure. Through the door to the left we have a little armory. I'm going to add a second weapons board to the corner and redo the desk so it covers the entire room and has a little plexiglass separator for a more secure look. And to the right of the hall there's a very messy storage room. I actually had all the guns on the rack, and then before I could take my shot I bumped it, sending them all crashing down again. So this poor overgeared green shirt, who was clearly expecting a different assignment, is left to clean up my mess. Starting with the other side on top is the Hangar Bay, occupied here by the big Millennium Falcon. I bought the Falcon on its first release, and it's still one of my favorite toys, but it's far from perfect. I would have traded in the electronics for more interior space and a door from the cockpit to the rest of the ship. I'm generally not a fan of lights and sounds anyway. I will admit, though, the engine glow and noises, especially when the engines fail, are one of the better uses of lights and sounds I've ever come across. Here's the hangar all emptied out. The floor has taken a bit of a beating, and eventually the plan is to cover it with flat plastic panels. We also have a nice view down the alley to the end of my part of the display. Here's things set up a little bit differently, trading the big Millennium Falcon for a few iterations of the Skyhawk, along with a few droids and some logistics equipment. And a quick look from the other side. In the background you can see my Tatooine display and the fuzzy rear end of Azzy the cat, who loves to share his fur with all my dioramas. In the hangar's balcony is G.I. Joe's Fire and Rescue Squad. Flamethrower troopers never really made any sense to me on the modern battlefield, so I've always used guys like Charbroil as firefighters. Moving down under the hangar is the base's engineering section. A repainted Star Trek The Next Generation engineering playset from the 90s makes up the left half. I use a back-to-tank as a coolant reservoir or something, and the standing screens are from the reboot Trek movie line. This one needs more piping and greebling details all over, but it's a good base to start with. Here's airtight monitoring the power core for radiation. So the coolant system lights up from underneath. The system needs a good painting to match the rest of the engineering set. Techie greebles are hard to come by, and while I've hoarded some, I've got 5 or 6 science-y type dioramas to detail, so if anyone knows where to get old model parts or other cheap greeble pieces, let me know in the comments. Beneath the engineering section we have the garage. The compressor, torch, engine, and diagnostic computer are all die-cast 1/18 Maisto stuff. On the very bottom between the 3 shelves lies the secret harbor. I don't own anything vintage for G.I. Joe, and there were no modern releases of the Whale, unfortunately, but for the price these Soldier Force boats ain't bad. I had a Whale when I was a kid, and I wore that thing out. It was probably my favorite all-time Joe vehicle, as far as what I owned. That said, I'm glad to have a little Navy for my Joes, so yay Soldier Force. This is the wall that covers my harbor from dirt and cat hair. It's all foam and fairly sturdy and ends the base nicely. There's a small area on top that I'd like to mount a few flags to, just to give the base more aggressive front, kind of in the vein of the original G.I. Joe headquarter toy. Moving on to the outer short shelf, which was added later, is the landing pad, occupied by the same X-Wing I showed earlier. I rearranged mid-photo shoot after seeing how dusty everything was. All of my dioramas are lit up by either micro LEDs or tap lights, and this one actually has blue landing markers. Here's a quick shot of the landing pad from a different angle. Right below the landing pad is a briefing room. This planning table came with the click and play Quonset hut, and it is great. I like miniature things, obviously, so miniature things for other miniature things is doubly awesome. The room also has a nice window that overlooks the harbor. Below the briefing room is just a hall. The open door leads out to the harbor. On the left wall, not pictured, are the light control boxes for this part of the base. And lastly, on the bottom is a small gymnasium. It still needs a lot of gym equipment. The weight sets are from a Japanese capsule toy. It's hard to find compatible stuff at this scale sometimes, but with 3D printing becoming more accessible, I'm hoping in the not too distant future to start making my own things. And that concludes the military base section of our toy display. You'll have to excuse any technical issues. I am not, let's say, digitally inclined, and I'm learning as I go. Thanks for watching.